From the Albuquerque Journal, this is the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. It's Thursday, January 22nd. Here's what we're covering on today's episode. An annual helicopter count of endangered wolves has been indefinitely paused, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service won't say why. With more on this development, we now turn to the Journal's federal government reporter Kathy Cook, who's been following this story. Kathy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Gino.
Kathy, we were talking a little bit before we jumped on the recording that you've kind of really become the Journal's resident wolf expert. You've been covering the endangered Mexican gray wolves for quite a while now. And this latest development about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service canceling this annual helicopter count, what can you tell us about this development and why they're not saying anything?
So the annual population count is an important part of how Fish and Wildlife and other state agencies that are working to recover the species figure out how they're doing and track their progress. So the count starts with a ground count in the fall, and that is still ongoing. But it also includes a helicopter count where they fly around and target specific wolves. They shoot them with a dart gun and sedate them, and then the wolves are given a new radio collar, their blood is drawn, they're given a health exam, they're vaccinated for diseases. So there's a lot of information they get from the blood drawn from the health exam about the wolves and that wolf individually. And then it also helps them, track the wolf into the future over the next year. So we found out this week that Fish and Wildlife has paused the aerial operations part of the population count. I asked repeatedly why it was paused, and they gave me no answer. I asked, if there are any plans to do the aerial count sometime later this year, and I have no answer. So, I have more questions than answers for you, really, Gino.
And Kathy, as you mentioned in that answer, the ground counts are still continuing here, but without the aerial count data as well, there's going to kind of be an incomplete picture on the population of these gray wolves.
Yeah, but so I did get a chance to speak with someone from an environmental advocacy organization, Greta Anderson, and she has been tracking the wolves for a very long time and really keeps an eye on where they are in the state based on the maps and the sort of recovery effort here in New Mexico and Arizona. And she's very concerned that we won't get updated genetics on the wolf population this year if they don't do the count, and that we may have less data about where which wolves are if we don't get more wolves radio collars this year, because there is, the population has been growing for the last 9 years, I think, but it is still only 280 some wolves at the last count here in Arizona and New Mexico. So it's not a large population of wolves. And so there's real concern both from environmental advocates and from, the federal agencies doing this recovery effort about the genetic diversity within the wolf population. So tracking that is important, right, to the species recovery.
And Kathy, last question before I let you go. The timing of this announcement is pretty interesting, if not coincidental. It comes after there was a death of an actual young Mexican gray wolf over the weekend, nicknamed Taylor. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, but that is a sad situation, but also not an unusual situation. So this is male wolf 3065. He's been nicknamed Taylor, and he was hit by a vehicle along I-40 near Grants, and that is how he was killed over the weekend. It's certainly not unusual for wildlife to be killed by vehicles on our highways. Advocates sort of announced this death and brought it to public attention. They've been paying special attention to this particular wolf because he's one of those wolves that has wandered outside of the Mexican wolf experimental population area, which is the area in which all the agencies are trying to recover the species. So the northern boundary of that area is I-40, and he's wandered multiple times north of that boundary. Last year, he was relocated south twice and then wandered back north to Mount Taylor. So, the advocates I spoke with are pretty heartbroken to see his passing and are calling for more wildlife crossings to be built. There are some examples of that in other states, and I think there's some being built here as well.
So an interesting development as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has canceled this annual helicopter count. And Kathy, as you mentioned, not really giving any answers as to why. We'll keep our eyes on this story and see if we can get an explanation somewhere down the line. Journal Federal Government reporter Kathy Cook stopping by to share the latest. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, Gino.
New Mexico lawmakers are moving quickly this session to expand the state's participation in interstate medical compacts, which allow healthcare professionals to more easily practice across state lines. For more than 20 years, New Mexico has only belonged to one such agreement for nurses. Now, 10 separate compact bills covering physicians, dentists, therapists, social workers, counselors, and other providers have passed their first legislative committees. Supporters say joining these compacts could help ease the state's severe healthcare shortages. 32 of New Mexico's 33 counties are designated as shortage areas. This could also reduce long wait times for patients as well. Lawmakers caution, however, that the compacts are only a partial solution. Senator Linda Trujillo said, quote, "It is a tool, not a cure." The Physician Compact, Senate Bill 1, has received the most attention after changes addressing concerns about data sharing and abortion-related protections. Analysts estimate it could boost physician license applications by up to 15%, though the actual increase in providers may be closer to 3%. Some lawmakers note many compacts primarily streamline licensing or support telehealth rather than guaranteeing more doctors will move to New Mexico. Castellian Corporation broke ground this week on a massive hypersonics manufacturing campus in Sandoval County, marking a major investment in New Mexico's defense and technology sector. U.S. Army Lieutenant General Francisco Lazario called the project a, quote, "statement about the Army's urgency to deter conflict and win future wars if necessary." The 1,000-acre site, known as Project Ranger, will include 22 buildings and serve as the full-scale manufacturing hub for Castellian's hypersonic missile, Blackbeard. Construction is expected to wrap up later this year, with missile delivery targeted for 2027. The project will employ about 400 construction workers and will eventually support up to 300 full-time jobs, with an estimated $650 million economic impact over the next decade. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and state leaders highlighted significant public investment in the project, including $125 million in industrial revenue bonds and $10 million in economic development funds. Castellian chose New Mexico over nearly 24 other states, citing its proximity to national laboratories, military installations, and a skilled workforce. The project also aligns with a broader push by the Trump administration to significantly increase U.S. defense spending. And New Mexico's food and drink scene earned national recognition this week, as 6 restaurants and chefs were named James Beard Award semifinalists, all highlighting the state's growing culinary profile. Among them is Bow and Arrow Brewing Company, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and earned a semifinalist spot in the Outstanding Beer category. Co-founder Shyla Shepard said the honor reflects the brewery's focus on creating a distinctive, welcoming experience rooted in the Southwest. Also recognized in Albuquerque were Daydream Rum Bar, the first-time semifinalist for Best New Bar, and the Berkey Bakehouse, a returning semifinalist for Outstanding Bakery. The James Beard Foundation will announce finalists on March 31st and winners on June 15th in Chicago. On the chef side, Steve Riley of Albuquerque's Mesa Provision, Graham Dodds of Nosa Restaurant and Inn in Ojos Caliente, and Danny Chileos of Avero's Desert Crossing in Sunland Park were named semifinalists for Best Chef in the Southwest. While the recognition is meaningful, Riley emphasized that the true goal remains simple: continuing to make great food and showcasing New Mexico's talent on a national stage. The leading news is powered by the journalism of the Albuquerque Journal. If you enjoy hearing all of the stories we share with you here daily, please consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Journal by utilizing the discount code in our show notes. Every subscription helps support local journalism and allows us to provide you with the news that matters to you. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Mostly cloudy skies are expected today with a high near 52, and as for this evening, mostly cloudy with a low around 29. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. That's the leading news. I'm Gino Gutierrez. We'll be back tomorrow.